Hello and welcome back. I am Mr. Sosotris, and this week I am doing my yearly recap of everything that I read this year. I am currently reading like 3 books, but I don't think I'm going to finish them by the time December ends, so I think I can safely say this is sort of what I read this year. This has been a really good year, actually. I've gotten through 112 books, and it's been a mix of a bunch of different formats. I've gone through audiobooks, ebooks, physical books, lots of library books this year, which was great. Libby introduced me to a lot of new books that I'd never even heard of just because I was mindlessly scrolling and seeing what was available. So this is good. This is good. We've got a bunch of books to get through. I tried to narrow it down, but I just couldn't. So what I did was I just stuck to kind of my favorite books from each month, and I'm focusing on books that I read for the first time. So there's a bunch of stuff that I read that I did enjoy each month, but it was like a reread of something that I've already read. So these are just books I read for the first time this year, and we're just going to go through this list, and it's going to be bonkers. So let's see how this works. Okay, so starting off, the first thing I read was actually a really good one, and this was Dust and Lightning by Rebecca Crunden. This is a sci-fi adventure sort of mystery book. It's not quite a novella, but it's sort of on the shorter side of novels. But this was great. The character work was really good. It was a lot of fun. I had a great time with this one. Would highly recommend this author. She's got a bunch of other stuff, and I've picked up some of it through like Stuff Your Kindle events, and others I just got because I really like her work. And so this was kind of my introduction to her writing style, and I really, really enjoyed it. Really great world building, good characters. This was wonderful. This one was an ebook. Next up was a audiobook that I got from the library, and that was The Painted Veil by W. Somerset Maugham. This was excellent. I really, really enjoyed this one. It's a classic. It's sort of written in the 1920s, but it feels very, very modern. And the character arcs in this one are so good. You've got this woman who's kind of having an affair, and then she's sort of pulled away to China of all places to help her husband, who's kind of working on tamping down like a cholera epidemic in China. And so she feels very disconnected and cut off, and she's sort of able to sort of find herself through this, and she realizes that she's not sort of this weak trivial person who just needs to sort of distract herself all the time from kind of her miserable existence, and she's able to find her inner strength, and just she forges kind of a new connection with her husband. It was really, really good. Taking a character who you start off you really don't like and making her someone that you do like by the end is a very difficult thing to do well. So I really enjoyed that one. Next up, this was a physical read, and that was The Seventh Veil of Salome by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is a historical book, and it's great. It's very old Hollywood, sort of Sunset Boulevard kind of era. You've got 2 POV characters that are actresses that are in this film project that's like the film version of The Legend of Salome. And then the third POV is actually Salome herself, sort of living the events as they're played out in the movie. And it's great. This one is just, it's messy and drama and competition between these sort of petty actresses and the systemic racism of Hollywood. But honestly, this reads more just like a really fun, like soap opera kind of thing rather than any kind of sort of pretentious book that takes itself too seriously. The author is very clearly having a lot of fun. And if you like sort of that Sunset Boulevard sort of heightened, not camp, but satirical look at Hollywood, this would definitely be the one for you. I had a great time with this one. Next up was another physical read, and that was The Will to Change by Bell Hooks. This is nonfiction. This is looking at sort of masculinity and the effects of patriarchy on masculinity, and the ways in which men can sort of tear down sort of patriarchal concepts that don't serve anyone and tear those down kind of from the inside. There's so much in here about sort of the ways that men are damaged by patriarchy and just the ways that it causes them to treat women badly, basically, and kind of the ways that they can unlearn a lot of those behaviors. And I really, really enjoyed this. This was so insightful, and there's so much stuff in here. And she gets into stuff that isn't really relevant to me personally, but it's still really wonderful to get into just the way that her mind works. Bell Hooks is incredible, and I love, 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 love the way that she's able to just sort of look at the way things work and just saying, this is how it's working, this is why things don't work, and this is what we can do to fix it. There's so many books about this kind of thing that just sort of complain and just say, you know, men are treated badly, and then they leave it at that. And in this one, she really lays out steps for, like, this is how we can actually fix things, and this is how we can, you know, raise boys better, to be more thoughtful and to be more emotionally intelligent. And it just really, really wonderful. I really, really enjoyed this one, would highly recommend it to everybody. Next up was the winner of the most controversial book review video award. This is the one that got the most comments, and that was Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. Now, I originally went through this via audiobook, and then I got the physical book sort of when I was about halfway through, and was kind of going through it, because there's stuff in the physical book that you sort of don't pick up on from the audiobook, especially like the references and the sources and the further reading that he includes at the end. So this, I really, really enjoyed this one. This is definitely a starting point for kind of looking at the history of the United States through the lens of minorities that have been oppressed, and he goes through sort of everything, and so it's kind of a breakneck tour through kind of all of U.S. history. And so this is definitely something where you can take this as a starting point and then read more into the various specific historical time periods that interest you, so you can get more detailed information. But overall, he basically just talks about how the driving force in the United States has always been sort of big businesses and capital growth, and there's a lot of minorities and groups that have been treated badly by that constant push for sort of, you know, constant economic growth, basically. And the section on the worker revolts in the early 1900s was probably one of my favorite parts. That's a section that it isn't talked about, and it's not something that he made up. This, you can read about the worker revolts and the events that led to that whole conflict elsewhere, but it was always sort of something in the background. And, you know, the only thing I really knew about was like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, and how that was kind of a big moment for like working conditions in the US. But there's a whole lot more, and I really, really, really enjoyed this one. It's a hefty book, but it's definitely worth reading. A lot of the comments that I got on the initial review video of this was, everyone is just saying, it's like, oh, well, he's slanted and he's just making things up. And it's like, all history is slanted. Of course it is. He's focusing specifically on underprivileged minorities, and that is a slant in itself, because there's other books that will look at the history of the United States from the point of view of kind of the government. Who was in charge? What conflicts did the government face? That kind of thing. This is focusing on what struggles did the various minorities face while things were changing. So of course it's slanted. It's going to focus on that group, and it's going to, you know, their perspective on things. But he uses like genuinely good sources. So regardless of what everyone says, this is a wonderful starting point to then explore more into these various historical topics. All right, now we're going into February. That was January. So we're going into February now. And February was, is Black History Month. So there's going to be kind of a theme here. But I read Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. This was excellent. I did read another of his books called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I really liked that one as well, but I think Stamped from the Beginning is the one that I would recommend to everyone, because it's just excellent. Again, he's looking at sort of systemic racism and the ways in which black people were mistreated, but not in terms of like just a few crazy people here and there. It was the way things worked was designed to oppress black people and keep them down. And so this was a really eye-opening read. It was really, really fantastic. That one I went through via audiobook. Next up is The Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. This was a physical read. This is my favorite Toni Morrison book that I've read so far, and that includes, I've read The Bluest Eye, Sula, Beloved, and this one is the one that I was like, wow, this was incredible. I love all of her stuff, obviously, but this one really blew me away. It's so good. The storytelling, the character work. This one kind of takes the perspective of kind of a young man. It's kind of a coming of age story as we follow him through his life, and then it even becomes kind of a treasure hunt at one point. And it's just, the cast of characters is wonderful. The way that she brings these people alive is always so good. This is funny, it's tragic, it's just incredible. Would highly recommend this one. Song of Solomon, Toni Morrison. Read her work, she's amazing. Next up was another physical read. This was an anthology of short stories, and that is How Long Till Black Future Month by N.K. Jemisin. This was a really surprising read because you get a sense of, when you read her novels, there's such an epic sweep, and it just feels like these worlds are so well created, and it there's kind of this grandeur to it. And in these short stories, you can tell that she's having so much fun, because there's just bonkers stuff in here that you wouldn't expect to see. Like this has the kind of feeling of not necessarily comedic stories, because there are some that are funny and there's some that aren't, obviously, but it just has this sort of whimsy and fun to it that you see in the short stories of authors like Neil Gaiman. And since, because things have come to light about that author, I don't really intend to read his work again, but this is really that kind of short story style, where it's just this sort of whimsical world. What if, a person, a chef in a hotel restaurant was given recipes that would cause magical things to happen? Or, what if a person was caught in a hurricane and magical things started happening around them? There's lots of sci-fi and fantasy in here. It's just a great collection of stories, and they were so much fun. So would highly recommend this. Sometimes anthologies can be hit and miss, because you've got like one or two really good stories, and then you've got the rest that are kind of like stories that were rejected from getting sent in, and they're not that great. But all of these are incredible. And there's also a story in here called The Ones Who Stay and Fight, which is sort of a stylistic response to Ursula K. Le Guin's story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, which is like a classic sci-fi story with like a big ethical quandary at its heart. And this takes another kind of approach to that. Really, really good. I loved this book. Next up is another physical read, and this was Watershed by Percival Everett. This is a sort of almost thriller, like political thriller kind of thing. It follows a guy who gets caught up in a group of indigenous people who are defending their land, basically, from like an oil company, I believe, who's set to kind of take over the area to drill for oil, and kind of these people are sort of, it's a group, maybe not a full tribe, but it's sort of a group of like a few families that have banded together to try to stop this from happening. And this random guy, I think he's an author, he gets sort of pulled into these events, and finds himself sort of having to stay one step ahead of like the police and the people working for this oil company. It was really fantastic, really well done. Percival Everett is incredible. I've got one more book of his on my shelf that I haven't read yet, and that's Erasure. But if you've read James and you're looking for more of his stuff and you want to read something very different from that, definitely read this. It feels very contemporary. The main character has kind of a quirky, fun, kind of sarcastic sense of humor to him, and then he gets pulled into kind of all this craziness. and it's just a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed this one. This is very much kind of a blend of styles, so I wouldn't really call it a thriller per se, but it kind of has that DNA in its bones, basically. But really enjoyed this one. All right, now we're in March, and this is kind of an odd book, but I really enjoyed it, and that is Moses, Man of the Mountain by Zora Neale Hurston. This is a sort of, it's like basically like a myth retelling in the vein of something like Circe, but it's looking at kind of the biblical story of Moses, and it injects the kind of the framework of like Black folklore into the story. So this is sort of Moses as he's revered by Black people in the 20s and before. This is sort of the version of him that is, a practitioner of magic and someone who sort of becomes a deity in his own right, someone to be worshipped, and the quote unquote God is more of a sort of smaller desert deity who's sort of tied to this one mountain, and Moses is the one who kind of has the power, who does all this stuff like the plagues and whatnot. But it's very much a really gorgeous sort of remix of the story filtered through Black folklore, and it's really, really wonderful. Her writing style is always excellent, and you can see a lot in here about sort of her political opinions. She wasn't very well liked in her day because she was quite conservative, and she had sort of views that the rest of her community didn't really agree with, and that's why she sort of ended up dying penniless without a lot of support, because she was sort of ostracized from her community. But I think she's still a valuable author to read. She was a folklorist and she was an anthropologist, and the way that she sort of depicts culture, especially Black culture, is really important. And you can see kind of her political beliefs in here, this sort of concept of, why can't we just be more polite and then they'll treat us better, which isn't, that's respectability politics, and that's not good. But this is still a really insightful look into kind of the way her mind works and the way in which kind of Moses is seen as a figure in sort of Black folklore and mythology. Really, really excellent. I had a great time with this one. Next up was an audiobook, and that was Pandora's Jar by Natalie Haynes. This is a nonfiction book looking at sort of famous women in Greek mythology and the way that their stories have kind of been told and retold over the years, and sort of the sources of their different myths and different versions of them and whatnot. It's a short, quick read, but it's wonderful. I really, really, really enjoyed that one. Natalie Haynes is excellent. And actually, the next book on the list is by Natalie Haynes as well, and that is 1,000 Ships. This is her Iliad retelling, and it focuses on sort of the women in the Iliad, and also the Odyssey as well, because we do get Penelope sort of being apprised of the events of the Odyssey as they kind of go along. I think she consults an oracle who kind of tells her about everything that happened. And this was wonderful. It's very ethereal, and I don't even know how to say it because it's told kind of out of order. It's sort of very fragmented. It's like looking through like a mosaic, basically. And so you've got different women kind of throughout the Trojan War, and you see their perspective on a certain scene, and then maybe it'll go back and it'll show you another person who kind of leads up to that scene, or you'll see someone else who's way after it, and it's just excellent. I really, really loved the Judgment of Paris, the way that's described, and the kind of the way that the three goddesses who were involved sort of felt about sort of being put on display for the amusement of Zeus. We've also got Chryses and Brises, and they have a brief conversation that's probably my favorite part of the whole book. It's such a quiet moment. It's literally just them sitting next to each other talking, but it's so good. But this whole book was just wonderful. Definitely the favorite book by Natalie Haynes that I've read so far. And then this one was an audiobook, but I do also have the physical book. This was one that I there was like a sale or something, and so I was able to get the audiobook for like super cheap, and so I did that. And I'm really, really glad, because the book you could read it any way you want, but the audiobook has kind of an added element where there's like two narrators, and there's also elements where like Amina will be talking to someone kind of off screen, so to speak. And so the way she does it in the audiobook is she'll like cover the mic and then kind of talk over here, so like her voice is muffled but you can still hear her conversation. And I think that added a really fun dynamic. But this book is delightful. It is so much fun. It is like old-fashioned swashbuckling adventure, and it does sort of tie into her Daevabad series, sort of. We do see a couple Devas at one point. They're kind of on the beach, and it's sort of like, oh yeah, they're kind of mysterious figures, and their culture is sort of elsewhere. This takes place way before the events of the Daevabad trilogy, which is set in kind of 1800s. This is sort of way back when, before that. But it was just so much fun, and I'm so excited to hear that there's a sequel coming out. I need more Amina. Her whole crew is just wonderful. All right, now we're moving into April. The next two were books that they were library books and they were audiobooks. These are Anthony Horowitz's James Bond sort of, not sequels, but like in-between-quels. And it was Forever and a Day and With a Mind to Kill. There is a third one that I don't think I've read yet, but it takes place kind of in the middle of the series, right after Goldfinger. Maybe I did read it, but I read it much later. Anyways, it was great. The first one is set kind of right at the beginning, before Casino Royale, and then the second one is set at the end of the series, right after The Man with the Golden Gun. It deals with the fallout from that one. And I love the way Horowitz works within kind of the James Bond framework, because he really captures Ian Fleming's writing style, and he changes his writing style based on kind of where he is in the series. And so Forever and a Day, which is the prequel, feels very much like Casino Royale in the way it's written. It's a little more reserved, and then when you get to With a Mind to Kill, that takes place after Man with the Golden Gun, which, by then the series had gotten a lot more bombastic and kind of outrageous, and so that book itself tends to be a little more bombastic and outrageous. But there was so much fun. I love the way he works kind of within the story, and he's able to connect things back to previous books, and they were just really well written. I really enjoyed both of them. And then next, this one was an audiobook. I checked this one out from the library, but I very quickly got the physical book because this is one that I want to read again in physical form. But it's Titus Grown by Mervyn Peake. This is the first book in the Gormenghast trilogy. I have since gotten the second and third book, so I do want to read them. But this is classic fantasy, unlike kind of any other fantasy that I've read. It kind of came out a little bit before, or maybe around the same time as The Lord of the Rings. Kind of in between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, I believe. And it's not fantasy in the sense of like dragons and magic. It's fantasy in the sense that it takes place kind of in another world, and it's this huge sprawling castle called Gormenghast, and the people who live there are sort of stuck in kind of ancient traditions, and everyone has kind of gone a little loopy. All the people that live there are sort of odd and strange, in kind of a creepy kind of way, and you've got a couple things that happen that sort of disrupt this sort of stagnant life in Gormenghast. You've got the birth of a new child, which is the heir, which hasn't happened in a long time, and then you've also got a kind of Machiavellian kitchen boy named Steerpike, who sort of manipulates his way up into the upper crust, basically, of this family, and by kind of manipulating people and stuff. And it's just excellent. It's so much fun. The writing style is so ornate and gorgeous. This is another one that sort of suggests, like, you can see that this was sort of a inspiration for, authors like Neil Gaiman. But it's just got this sort of Dickensian kind of sense of humor to it. It's got this, you've got sort of weird, strange characters with sort of bizarre names, sort of lurking and shuffling about this castle, and everyone has kind of quirky accents and sort of weird habits, and it's very gothic, and it's a ton of fun. So I really, really enjoyed this one. I haven't started reading the second and third books because I'm a little intimidated by them. The writing style is a little bit dense. It's easy enough to follow, but it's just one of those ones where you really have to be kind of with it. And I think when I continue with the series, I'm going to stick with the physical version, because then you can kind of take a little bit more time to sort of appreciate the language, because the language is a big draw for this one for me. I think in audio, you get to appreciate all the quirky accents and behaviors of all the characters, but it can be a little hard to follow the plot at times. So I'm going to stick with the physical books going forward. All right, we're moving into May, and basically the next 3 books are all by the same author and part of the same series, but it's fine. But that would be the first 2 books of Claire North's The Songs of Penelope trilogy, Ithaca and House of Odysseus. These books are wonderful. They're very gently paced, and I think some people might get a little frustrated with kind of the slow pace, but this is very much a slow burn. It's all about character. It's all about Penelope's kind of internal mindset in the years leading up to when Odysseus comes back. And he comes back at the end of the second book, and then the third book kind of involves, his return, basically. But this, we also get some great interlacing with other stories like the Orestia, with Electra and Orestes and Agamemnon and all that stuff. And I think Helen of Troy shows up at one point as well. And so you get the sense of just how tenuous the position in Ithaca was while Odysseus was away, and how important it was that he not only came back, but he came back with a show of force that was enough to keep all the kind of circling buzzards from kind of descending on this island, because it is kind of important in terms of where it's placed. But I really, really loved this one. There's some really good character work. I love the way she writes Telemachus, and Penelope is just excellent. And each book is narrated by a different goddess, which I thought was really cool. The first book is narrated by Hera, the second book is narrated by Aphrodite, and the third one is narrated by Athena. And so it isn't narrated by Penelope herself. You get sort of these 3 goddesses' perspectives of her, and so the way that she appears changes a little bit depending on which goddess is narrating the story, which I also really love, because you get to see different elements of Penelope and the people around her. Fantastic, fantastic series. Loved it. Moving into June, this one was an audiobook that I checked out from the library, and that was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This is, of course, the Hunger Games prequel, and I really, really enjoyed this one. The depiction of sort of living in a state that's falling towards fascism. I guess it kind of already is, but this idea of us seeing the upper crust, who kind of cast themselves as victims, making the steps to sort of consolidate power and reassert kind of the gears of fascism to keep the other districts in line, and see kind of the beginnings of that, was really, really fantastic. I really, really enjoyed this one. And then after that, of course, we're continuing on with Songs of Penelope, and that's the last Song of Penelope by Claire North. Wonderful. This one, of course, follows the events of the Odyssey at the end when Odysseus comes back. And I like the way that it's able to make sense of kind of the final book in the series, because when you read the Odyssey, the final book seems to kind of come out of nowhere. It's like it ends on a happy note. It's like, okay, they're together, everything's great. And then we get this epilogue, basically, where all the suitors' families kind of rise up and sort of lay siege to Odysseus' house, and then I think Athena sort of swoops in and stops it at the last minute, and then everyone goes home and it's fine. And this one sort of turns that moment into a much bigger sort of siege, basically, where you've got all these people and they've got this army and they're laying siege to Odysseus' house, and they have to kind of find a way to withstand the siege and protect themselves. And it was really fantastic. The killing of the suitors is all kind of done in the background because Penelope wasn't there, and so it's really chilling. We get to see kind of this mass murder happening, but it's all sort of out of the corner of your eye or in the background, and it's really effectively done. I really, really appreciated that. Great trilogy, would highly recommend it. Next up was an ebook that I read, and that was All Systems Red by Martha Wells. This is the first Murderbot book, and I had a great time with this. The vibes are perfect. It's not necessarily cozy because there is some action, but it just feels like a world that is very well realized, and seeing it from the point of view of kind of a sarcastic, killing machine who doesn't really want to do that. He just wants to kind of enjoy his trash television show, and the way he interacts with other people, it was just great. I also read the second book in that series. I didn't like it as much as the first one, but I do want to continue with the series. But yeah, really, really enjoyed this one. I haven't seen the TV show yet either, but eventually I will get around to that. Next up is, I kind of consider whether I wanted to include this or not, but it's The Reluctant Companion by H.L. Day. This is a sort of comedy, fantasy, romance book. It's the first in a series. I think I picked this up at a Stuff Your Kindle event, and it's great. It's very gay. It's all banter and fantasy chaos. It's very funny. It's not childish at all. It's still very adult, but it's just, the Grumpy Sunshine kind of pairing and the madcap adventures that happen to them. And basically in this world, like, literally everyone's gay. Like, it's that's just the way it is. And it's so much fun. The comedy is just perfect. I laughed out loud multiple times in this. There's one part where there's like a giant weasel, and it's so funny. Anyways, I really enjoyed this one. Definitely want to continue on with the series. Would highly recommend this one. I think this one's an indie release, so I don't know if you could get it at like the bookstore or whatnot, but definitely look for it in ebook form. You can get it on your Kindle really easily. I think it's part of Kindle Unlimited too. Next up is another physical read, and that was An Indigenous People's History of the United States. This isn't a super long read, so it's pretty quick, and I really, really enjoyed this one. Now, I went into this book sort of being like, okay, well, I already know a lot about what it's going to talk about, and so I was expecting not to be sort of surprised by everything. It was more just kind of a sense of, I've read this in other books, and I want to see what this author does with the same information. But this is really insightful, and we get a lot of information that I completely didn't even know about, which I'm glad that I read it. But this is really, really excellent. It's thoughtful, and it really paints a very broad picture of just the treatment of Indigenous people in the United States, throughout history. You see lots of repeating patterns and trends, and I really appreciated that. Also, as a Canadian, I think it's important for Canadians to read stuff like this, because only just now are we starting to see Canadian writers doing the same thing about how Indigenous people were treated in Canada, and it's still very much a big issue in Canada, but it's sort of, there's this sense of like, oh, well, there's no racism in Canada, everything's fine. It's like, that's not even remotely true. There's tons of it here. And it's important for, I think, everyone to sort of just read this kind of book just to see, be aware of this kind of thing. Governments have never treated Indigenous people well in any country, whether it's Australia or Canada or the United States. So I'm really glad that I read this one. I really had a great time with it. Maybe not a great time is the right word, because it was kind of a harrowing read, but it was very insightful, and I learned a lot from it. Now, this is one that I've read before, but it's a different translation, so I'm going to count it. And that was the translation of the Aeneid by Virgil by Shadi Barch. This was such a good read. The Aeneid is great. I'm a huge epic poetry fan, especially Greek and Roman stuff, but this translation does such a good job of giving it kind of a gory immediacy that really fits, especially in the battle sequences. And just really, really enjoyed this one. It's very crunching and violent, and just it pulls you along effortlessly. And what makes this one really good is the translator was able to sort of capture the flow of the original Latin, which is hard to do. So you get a sense of kind of the pulse and flow of the original Latin. I had a great time with this one. And there's a new translation of the Aeneid that just came out, and I picked that up for Christmas using a gift card. So I'm very excited to read that one, and I'll let you all know what I think about it when I get there. All right, moving into July, we've got Hera by Jennifer Saint. This was probably her thickest book of hers, but I really, really enjoyed this one. Jennifer Saint is one that, like, I either really love her work or I kind of like it, but it doesn't really wow me. Like, Ariadne was incredible, loved that one. Atalanta was fine, it was good, but it didn't really, like, stick with me, really. And what's her other one? Electra was good, but again, it didn't really wow me. It was kind of like a 4 out of 5, kind of thing. But this one was really, really good. This one I liked as much as Ariadne. This one it's very much focusing on sort of the arc of how Hera was able to consolidate her power over the years, because she starts out, believing that she's going to be sort of an equal to Zeus, and she's very quickly kind of pushed down. And so we get to see her perspective of a bunch of different myths throughout the years, and it doesn't dwell on a bunch of them for very long. Things like Heracles, it kind of, we get her perspective of it, but we don't get like a play-by-play of what Heracles was doing on Earth. It's more her opinion of him and what his actions, like what effect they had on her. But this was really, really wonderful. It touches on a bunch of different disparate stories and makes them all sort of fit together in a cool way, which you don't normally see. I think that's one of the main appeals of doing myth retellings, is there's often so many different versions of stories and different sources. And so finding a version of the story that's kind of unified and touches on all those different elements can be hard to do, and Jennifer Saint does a really, really good job with this one. I loved this book. And since I was going through a Greek and Roman period, at this point I was reading the Aeneid, I also was going through SPQR by Mary Beard. This one I read in physical form, and I'm glad I did, because the book is filled with illustrations that I would have missed out on if I had gone through this via audiobook. But I really, really loved this one. It kind of takes a different approach to the history of Rome than other things, because at the same time I was listening to the History of Rome podcast. Oh, and I can't remember the guy's name, it's terrible, but it was very much like chronological from the beginning, and it focused a lot on sort of who was in charge, what was the culture like, how did things change, that kind of stuff. This one, she talks about sort of how we know what we know about ancient Rome. And so she doesn't just talk about the events of Roman history. She talks about the archaeology that went into reassembling our knowledge of Roman history. And so you get a really cool perspective of sort of the stuff we know for sure, and the stuff that we think we know but we aren't as sure about, and the stuff that has become kind of myth but there's no evidence to support it. And so this was really, really insightful. She starts kind of right in the middle with a single event that is very, very well documented, and so we know for sure that all this stuff happened. And then she kind of goes back and looks at sort of the blending of myth and history that kind of became Rome's past. But I really enjoyed this one, had a great time with it. Next up was Persuasion by Jane Austen. Now, this was the end of a Jane Austen marathon. I was reading all of her books in order, and this was the last book, and I've never read this one before, so this is the first time I read this one, and I loved it. Shortly after this, a friend lent me the film version from the 90s, which is also really excellent. I loved that one. But this book was so, so good. It felt very different from kind of the other Jane Austen books that I've read before. It feels very relatable to sort of contemporary readers in a way that the others maybe aren't. Like, Pride and Prejudice is sort of probably the most famous, and I think for a good reason, because that one feels like a kind of, it's been the template for so much, so many romance books after that, the kind of enemies to lovers kind of thing. But this one, there's this sense of kind of longing and disconnection and having to put yourself first for so long, and then making the decision to sort of say, no, I'm going to actually prioritize my own happiness for a change, and kind of taking charge of your own future. And the second chance romance element was also really wonderful. The character work is so good. I loved this one. I think Pride and Prejudice is still my favorite Jane Austen book, but this is very, very close to second place. I loved this one. All right, we're moving into August, and this is one that took up a lot of space, but that was War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Now, this one I did go through via audiobook. I do have this one. The audiobook translation was one that I liked a little bit better. This translation isn't bad, but I think the audio version that I read, I don't know, it blended the French into the kind of English, because when you're translating this kind of book into English, you have to kind of think, there's a lot of French in the book because the upper crust of Russia spoke French, and it's a very big part of the story, because you've got, at the beginning, they sort of idolize the French and everyone is speaking French, whatever, and then as you go, you get this kind of rising sense of Russian nationalism, and more people start speaking Russian, and they kind of turn against the French, and you get to see that process happen. This is a very, very long book, but it did not feel like a very long book. There's actually a shorter book that I'm going to talk about a little bit later that is shorter than this, but it took longer to read than this one. But I really, really appreciated this one. The audio version that I went through, it was narrated by Thandue Newton, the actress, and it was really, really fantastic. She handles the French dialogue really well, and it's done in such a way that you know what is being said without it having to constantly be kind of translating everything, and it just gives a sense of what it was like in that time. But anyways, this was phenomenal, so good. The character work is incredible. Tolstoy is great. I've read Anna Karenina and I really loved that one, and this was just as good. So this was a very big undertaking, but I'm impressed that I was able to get through it. And this one I was able to get through in like 3.5 weeks. I think at that time there was a lot of like commuting and walking, and I was listening to it constantly, and so I was able to get through the story fairly fast. But I did read, like I went through the whole text of anything. I didn't skip anything, but it was a really good read. And I think next time I read this, I'm going to go through the physical version, read this translation, just to kind of see what other elements of the story show through in this version. So really enjoyed this one, would highly recommend it. Now we're moving to a very short book. This was a physical read, and this is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal El-Motar. This was delightful. This is very poetic, very literary. It's sci-fi, but there's kind of a surreal quality to it that I really liked. You've got these two time agents who are communicating back and forth, and they leave messages to one another in increasingly complicated ways. One of them involves like manipulating the growth of trees so that the rings inside the tree spell out words, and leaving messages in like the rings of trees, or it was just beautiful. And like after a while, you just kind of lose yourself in the poetry of the language. There is a lot of tension in the story, especially because you've got these two figures who they are on opposite sides, but they end up connecting with one another, and they have to keep this a secret from their higher ups. And just wonderful. Would highly recommend this. Yes, it does live up to all the hype. Don't put it off. It's so good. Moving into September, I just have one book that was a new read. The rest of the books that I read in September were all rereads. But that was The Mere Wife by Maria Devana Headley. This is a Beowulf retelling, but it's set in the modern day. Really wonderful. I was not expecting this to go to the places that it did. It has kind of a satirical heightened reality sense to it, very magical realism, and just excellent. The characters are so good. Seeing the way that the Beowulf characters are translated into this kind of setting was really funny, and it was very, very kind of over the top in the best way, because Beowulf is kind of an over the top story anyways. But I really enjoyed this one. I've blabbed about this one before, so you can read or you can go through my full thoughts on this one, but really enjoyed this one, would highly recommend it. Moving into October, this is the book that actually took me the longest to read, and that was Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. This was a physical read, and this book is so gorgeous. It's magical realism, it's fantasy-esque, but it's looking at sort of the history of Indian independence from the point of view of a child who sort of is able, he's born really close to the stroke of midnight of when India gained independence, and so all the children who are born at that time, they all have sort of abilities and powers, and it's not a fantasy book. Yes, you'd expect this to be more like an X-Men kind of thing, where you get all these kids who with powers, they come together and they save the day. And that's not it. It's very much about how their powers affected their perception of the events around them. So it's very much, it feels more like a historical book, but there's fantastical things that happen throughout. Really beautiful, really, really incredible. The language in this is just stunning. It kind of treads the line between fun and quirky to like brutally, complicated and dark stuff. So would really, really recommend this one. I want to read his other work. I also have his book, The Satanic Verses, which I do want to read next year. And then this is another one where I've read this before, but this is a new translation, so it counts. And that is Beowulf, translated by Maria Devana Headley. I read this sort of after I finished The Mere Wife. We're in October now. And this was great. Her translation, this is the Bro translation, so it blends in sort of modern idioms with the historical stuff. And so the result is you just get this sort of mishmash of dialect and idiom that works, because it's sort of basically like the Beowulf mindset and the mindset of his people, of like the braggadocio and the reputation, by deeds and all that stuff that has continued today. And so you get this feeling of like, this could be, a frat house, or it could be, Harrod, the mead hall. It's just, I had so much fun with this one. Really great translation, would highly recommend it. Also in October, I read Lone Women by Victor Laval. This was a physical read. This is gothic horror-ish. It is, I guess it does count as gothic horror, but it feels more like American Gothic. It's really hard to describe, but you've just got sort of these homesteaders in turn of the century Montana who have to sort of survive in tiny cabins, and the winters there are very hard, and the only people you can rely on are your neighbors, but your neighbors are all like miles away. And throughout all of this, you've got this one fantastical element, this one dark thing that is kind of following the main character, and the effect that has on her ability to connect with others. And you also get this sense of isolation and not being able to trust the people around you. It's just excellent. The vibes in this one are absolutely perfect, and I loved this book so much. And then finally, this one was an ebook, but this was The Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. Now this is one, it sort of surprised me a little bit, because I was expecting a little bit more horror, but it felt more like a historical romance. Maybe not romance, but like a historical drama with kind of a love story at its heart. And the supernatural elements are sort of symbolically there to hammer home the main point, which is more about colonialism than anything. But the character work in this is so good. The relationship between the main characters is tumultuous and complicated, and the family dynamics of all of that, it's just wonderful, and you get so much historical detail. She apparently did tons of research, and you can tell, because everything just feels real, and it has textures and flavors, and you just feel like you're in this desert with these people with vampires lurking in the shadows. Really loved this one, would highly recommend it. I want to read her other book too, which is called The Hacienda, which is the other one. All right, now we're moving into November, and then I read Elfie by Gregory Maguire. This was an ebook. This is his Wicked prequel, in-between-quel, looks at Elphaba as a child, and I really enjoyed this one. I was expecting it to be a bit of a soulless cash grab, to be honest, but it was so good. The insight into her relationship with her family, the elements that connect to the story later on in the other books was well done. The language was really beautiful and poetic as always. I love Maguire's writing so much, but I really, really enjoyed this one. And I'm glad that I read it kind of right before Wicked for Good came out. So it was a nice lead-in into that. Next up, this was another ebook, and that was The Bewitching by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This is kind of gothic horror set in a New England town. There's sort of 3 time periods. One is set in the 90s. One is set before that. What is it? Like in the 50s or so. And then there's another one that's set in like the turn of the century. And all 3 storylines kind of connect together. And there's kind of witchy stuff happening, and magic and curses and dark family secrets, and just the atmospheres in this one are wonderful. I love Sylvia Moreno Garcia so much, and she really knocked it out of the park with this one. All right, moving into December. We're almost done. The first one that I want to do is, this is a romantasy, and it was Betrayal of Storms by Ben Alderson. This is a gay romantasy, fae kind of thing. It's basically like a gay response to A Court of Thorns and Roses, but I had a great time with this. The character dynamics are so good. Ben Alderson, I've read his other work. Ben Alderson is so good at just realistic characters and blending sort of the drama and action with the romantic elements, so it feels like it all fits together. It's not just like, horrifying, brutal violence, and then all of a sudden it becomes sort of sweet, gushy romance. It doesn't do that. It really feels like it's all together, and there's lots of action, and I really want to continue on with the series because it sets itself up for kind of a really big cliffhanger that I really enjoyed. Next up was a nonfiction book, and this one was an audiobook, and that was An African History of Africa by Zainab Badawi. This one was excellent. It was very much kind of an overview, because the history of an entire continent is massive. Now, I did a full review on this one, so I don't want to spend too much time with it, but I really enjoyed it. It was a very eye-opening read, and I want to see more books in that vein, zeroing in on kind of specific countries and specific cultures, because we need more of that. And then the next one is a book that I've also done a full review on, and that was Eruption by Michael Crichton and James Patterson. This one surprised me. I was expecting it to be sort of a soulless, resurrection of a dead author's work, but it actually genuinely worked as a thriller, techno thriller. It felt like classic Michael Crichton. It was a lot of fun. The character arcs were really good, and I genuinely enjoyed this one. Next up is another one that I did a full review on, and that was The Moon and the Sun by Vonda and McIntyre. This historical fantasy, great character work. It won the Nebula Award. This one beat out A Game of Thrones, just to give you kind of a context. But fantastic book, really loved it. Wonderful characters, great story. Next up is a nonfiction book, and this is an ebook that I checked out from the library, and that was The Separation of Church and Hate by John Fugelsang. And I don't know if I pronounced that right, Fugelsang? I think so. Anyways, this was kind of in the vein of Jesus and John Wayne, looking at sort of the ways in which super fundamentalist groups have kind of corrupted the message of like Christian teachings, basically to suit their own needs. Now, it's told from the point of view of a Christian perspective, so be aware of that, but it basically just sort of looks at, first off, it talks about how you can't really use the Bible as a reliable source for anything, because there's a lot of things that contradict it, and there's a lot of stuff in it that comes from different cultural viewpoints and all that stuff. But he says if you kind of focus on the teachings of like Jesus specifically, then you see that the kind of the tenets of kind of the MAGA right don't line up with those teachings. And so this was a really good one. It's kind of quirky and funny, but it's also very well researched and very academic. So it blends those two very well. But it was an engaging read, really enjoyed it. I think I did still like Jesus and John Wayne better, but I really did enjoy my time with this book as well. And then finally, the last book was Wistful Ascending by J.M. Byrne. It's kind of a book that when I was reading it, I wasn't really sure what my opinion of it was, but then by the end of it, I was like, this is great. Hands down, 10 out of 10, loved it. This is a superhero space opera kind of world, and there's much more books in the series, so I want to read more. Or many more books in the series, but I want to read more. But it kind of has that feeling of cozy and action that you get in like Star Trek. So there's parts where it's just like conversations and everyday life and day in the life of living on a space station. And then there's also sections that are like, yes, I know. There's also sections that are like brutal violence and action and fighting for your life and giant monsters and enemies that are trying to kill you and everything. And it all just kind of fits because you've got this whole world. And so it's like if you took Becky Chambers' Wayfarer books and then blended them with like hardcore space opera action adventure with lots of violence and destruction and angst and drama. But it's just great. I had so much fun with this book. I loved it. It's an indie sci-fi book, so I think you can find it very easy. I think it's on Kindle Unlimited, but you can find it pretty easily online. But I loved it. Definitely want to continue with the series. And that's it. That's all of it. That's everything. Finally, we made it to the end. That was a very good reading year. There was lots of books that I had on my shelves that I wanted to read. So I was on kind of a book buying ban-ish for this year. I did get a few books here and there, but most of the time it was like if I got an audiobook from the library and I really liked it, I would get the physical book kind of thing. So it wasn't like out of control spending just for the sake of spending, but it was great. I got through a big chunk of my TBR. I had a really great time, and I'm looking forward to the next year. So we'll see how things go. It's going to be fun. I'm positive with how things are going. I've still got tons of books on my shelves that I have not read yet. So I'm going to sort of maintain the book buying ban as long as I can. Now, obviously, if there's books that come out that are sequels to series that I'm really looking forward to, I am going to get those. Like when the sequel to Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi comes out, I'm getting it. You know, that's not surprising. But I am going to still try to keep the constant spending down because there really is no need for that. Plus, there's lots of stuff from the library, and you can check out ebooks and audiobooks, and so, you know, you've got lots of stuff. So it'll be fun. I'm excited. Looking forward to how this is going. And yeah, with that, I will see you next week. And in the meantime, happy reading. Bye.